And this is the welcome to the third part of this lecture. We'll be looking at movement from inequality to poverty, and perhaps we begin with looking at the differences between the two, inequality and poverty. Now, there's a difference between the two. Inequality is about differences. It involves competition, whereas when it comes to talk about poverty, we are talking about scarcity, and in fact perhaps when there is not enough even to compete. So it leads to the understanding that poverty is a form of deprivation. Yeah, so deprivation meaning although you need it, but you are deprived of it because of scarcity, because of, let's say, scarcity of resources or material things. So sometimes poverty can be deprivation in terms of social situation, and also self-deprivation. It goes down. Poverty can lead to low self-esteem and so on and so forth. So here, poverty relates with the idea of scarcity. Scarcity di sini bermaksud tidak mempunyai resource yang mencukupi untuk setiap orang. So it's very different from inequality. Inequality refers to ketidaksamarataan to access or to have access to certain wealth and so on and so forth. Yeah, poverty and scarcity can be socially produced. Yeah, it can be socially produced. Now, absolute scarcity, yeah, and you can say absolute scarcity. How can it produce social? How can it produce scarcity socially? It can be resource may exist in geographical areas. Yeah, absolute scarcity of resources may exist in geographical areas. Certain areas have let's say jika ada keadaan tandus ataupun keadaan yang tidak sesuai dari segi geografi, it can lead to scarcity. Now, social scarcity can be relative. Yeah, so it occurs in a context of social class or relations. So if you're lower class, so perhaps that will lead to other form of scarcity. You don't have, let's say, money to buy certain things or to access certain clubs or to do certain things that other people do have money. So that's basically because you don't have money. So that leads to social or relative scarcity occurs in context of social relations. Yeah. Now let's look at poverty in Malaysia. Yeah. So income inequality, how it can be some people call it poverty can be a weapon of mass destruction, right? So if you look at some of these photos here, this is Malaysia, and you look at what poverty can do and how poverty is going. Maybe you look at the back here. Look at some of the buildings. Poverty and what they call it, kemajuan boleh coexist. Coexist with each other. Now, how to measure poverty? You look at this. How do you measure this? This is about poverty, but how do you measure? How do you give numbers to poverty? So these are one of the things that people have big debates about, how to measure poverty. And so, as mentioned just now, when we talk about inequality, income has become a mean to measure inequality. Same way also, income has been one of the main metrics to use to measure poverty globally. Yeah. Now, that is why when you look at the World Bank, they only produce global poverty statistics. So they provide the number of poor people in developing countries. So they come up with numbers trying to see whether poverty has gone down or gone up. So they use income metrics as a form of measurement, right? To look at, $1 a day. It dropped from 1.5 billion in 1981 to 1.1 billion in 2001. So it is very, very based on statistics. Yeah. So, but there are critiques towards the tendency to use income metrics to measure poverty, because they say $1 a day measure purchasing power parity, and actually some people say it is not so much how much money you earn or how much is your income. It is basically what is the power of the money that you earn or the income that you have. Whether sometimes people can earn $1 a day in Malaysia, but the amount or the number of food or the amount of food you can buy or how much you can do with that money, $1 might be bigger or might be more powerful, yeah, in terms of like that $1 in Singapore. So basically, so that's why they say that the income metrics, sometimes they don't measure purchasing power parity, right? And also extreme low measure of poverty. How do you account to that? Yeah, and how do you measure that? Yeah, so the extreme low measure of poverty. Arbitrary, there's the lacks of conceptual foundation. So these are some of the critiques towards income metrics. Malnutrition, shelter, housing, education, missing from notion of poverty. Yeah, so if you just focus on income metrics, how about malnutrition? How about shelter? About shelter, about housing, how about education? As you see later, we've seen inequality earlier, how important education is here in Malaysia. It's a mean for social mobility. So, but these are not considered in terms when we talk about poverty. Access to school, access to good school, access to teachers, access to means for good education. Yeah, so this leads to problems with measurement of poverty. Yeah, there's knowledge about numbers of global poor, but it is all about number. It is all about metrics. Yeah, so there is a bias in current methodology. So that because of that bias, it underestimates the incidence of global poverty. So there are aspects of poverty that get overlooked or not taken into consideration because of the biasness towards metrics, the use of numbers or the use of statistics to deal with or to study poverty. Yeah. Now this is because mainstream economists value income, so they overlook things like non-monetary capabilities, democratic agency, how about respect, how about well-being, about social cohesion. These are very important. Yeah, you may be rich, you may have high income, but how about your democratic agency? How about your capacities? How about your capabilities? How about your self-respect? How about your self-esteem, your well-being? You may be rich, but how about whether you have access to good water, whether there is a social cohesion in the area that you live? So basically, this is some of the, remember the Human Development Index, those guys that focus on human development approach, that says that development is freedom. Freedom for what? Freedom of what? Is that freedom from poverty? Is that freedom from political oppression? No, it is basically about Matthias Sen's notion of human development, that is development as freedom, that is basically about capacities, about functions in society. Now this is what capability approach, Matthias Sen saying goods not important in themselves, but what they can enable people to do. If you have 1 ringgit, for instance, yeah, it's not so much the number or the amount of the ringgit, but it's actually what can that 1 ringgit can do for you or to you or in that situation. Yeah, so what does it do in terms of conversion of social, environmental, personal factors, basic needs for doings and beings necessary to functioning. So basically, Matthias, and therefore that's why he said capability approach is basically it goes down to the person. Yes, we have basic needs, but we can by doing and being can help us to function properly in society, and then with that we can meet our basic needs. For instance, it's a Filipino women nannies. There's that international care chain. They feed, they clothe, they shelter children, families, and then they remit to the Philippines. In 1999, there's 7 billion in 1999. So global capital flows temper effects on global poverty and equality. So if you look at the Filipino women and nannies, sometimes people say, oh, they are poor, they are this and that, but actually when you look at the international care chain, yeah, they provide feed, they feed, they clothe, they shelter children, they provide for the family. Yeah, so in a, so in a sense that the power of the money that they give, the remittance that they provide, that they send back to the Philippines, is so powerful. Yeah, so and I remember one of my maid from the Philippines, with a salary, monthly salary, she was able to buy land for the family. She was able to buy or build a house for the family. So that is how basically, so what can the money, so it's not so much about the amount of money, but what can that money do in terms of when it is put in when it's relocated in a different place. So would it be able to temper the effects of global poverty and this and emotional hardship, loss of family intimacy can lead to poverty. Yeah, and the wider or another level, we can say look at the impact of cycles of droughts and floods, and what are the impact on poverty line in 2019. In 2019, 11.5% of the adult population are living with HIV. Before 1992, decades of war, slow development. So these are some of the situations that can lead to that can make a country poor. Corruption slows development even further. So that is basically some of the reasons why certain countries are poor. There are not always proper checks on how aid is being used. That is another thing. So some people call corruption leads to, therefore corruption leads, that gives emphasis on the need for savings, investment, the needs for innovation, for education, high achievement. Yeah, so all those things can lead to important means to come out of poverty. So for them, only when you do those, only then will the poor countries be able to cap population growth, stimulate democracy, and invigorate agricultural and industrial production. So for them, they say democratic system is the best way, basically, for poor countries to come out of poverty. Now, dependency theory pula, this is more of a conflict approach. Dependency theory believes that for the past 500 years, the most powerful countries in the world deliberately impoverish the less powerful countries. We have seen that, the debate we have seen coming out of Latin America, that suggests that the reason why Latin America and the rest of the world outside Europe that are living in poverty is because of dependency. Yeah, the non-European countries provide bahan mentah, and then they are being transformed into ready-made goods, which are sold at a higher price to places outside Europe. Yeah, so instead it ought to follow it follows the core principles of conflict theory and focus on patterns of domination and submission. So this idea of inequality, people live in poverty because they are being deprived by the powerful. Yeah, so it's an adequate theory of global inequality, should not focus on the internal characteristics of poor countries themselves. So they look at the structure, and this whole debate is ongoing in the US today. So there's this there is this argument that because of the structure of structural racism, therefore the black Americans are living in poverty. So that's the whole debate over there at the moment. Internal arrangement that can be that we need to look into as well, yeah, to come out of the conundrum of poverty. Now, questions of do foreign investment and liberalized trade policies have positive or negative effects today? Yeah, so you see modernization theories want more foreign investment in poor countries and freer trade. They strongly believe that following these policies will promote economic growth and general well-being. They want trade and investment barriers to be dropped so free market can bring prosperity to everyone. Now, dependency theories dramatically oppose this strategy. They think that foreign investment drains the wealth out of poor countries. Therefore, they want the poor countries to rebel against the rich countries, throw up barriers to free trade and investment, and find their own path to well-being. So there are two different theory looking at these things, so through two different perceptions. So these are the things, especially for your assignment 3. This is the sort of things that I'm looking at. The different argument. Let's say you pick up an issue. What would be the modernization theory say about it? What will be the dependency theory say about it? It's the same issue, same situation, but are their interpretation similar? If they say they look at an approach to deal with the issue, would it be the same? Would the same theory leads to the same? What sort of approach would a particular theory would lead and to, in terms of, to solve the problem in terms of policy implications and model of development implications. So you look at these two. Yeah, I have different thinking or different argument about foreign investment and liberalized trade policies. So different interpretation. Now, there is co-periphery and semi-periphery model that we have looked at. Immanuel Wallerstein argues that capitalist development resulted in a world system composed of 3 tiers. They said that co-capitalist countries, their major sources of capital and technology. The peripheral countries, there are major sources of raw materials and cheap labor, whereas the semi-peripheral countries, there are former colonies that are becoming prosperous. So that is basically Immanuel Wallerstein's idea about the economic structure at the global level. The semi-peripheral countries differ from the peripheral countries in 4 main ways: a type of colonialism, geopolitical position, the state policy, and social structure. Yeah, so basically these are the four ways or 4 characteristics that peripheral countries that make semi-peripheral countries different from the rest. Now, I want to end in looking at, yes, poverty is real, and then different interpretation. There are different interpretations about poverty, why it exists, and what causes it. But there is one thing that is quite standard in terms of how do we respond to poverty. Yeah. So for the modernist theory, they are concerned about responsibilities of helping those who are poor. So they provide aid. The wealthier countries give money for international development, which means helping poorer countries. So when properly used, this money tackles real problems such as health and education. Right. So question is, what percentage of its income do you think each country should give? So we look at aid from government. Yeah, we have looked at this before. It is often given on condition that it be used to buy from donor countries goods that are not necessarily high priority. Yeah, so it can be beneficial with oversight to ensure that the foreign aid is not wasted and is directed to truly helpful projects. So foreign aid. The other measure that's been used to respond to poverty at the international level is the trade justice movement campaigns to change UK, European Union, and global policies on trade. That is fair trade. Yeah, the fair trade marks ensure a fair deal for many small producers. Right. So you buy coffee at a price, and perhaps a huge percentage of the money that you pay for the coffee go to the small producers. Tariff reduction, the reduction of tariff by rich countries, because this tariff prevent developing countries from exporting goods that could earn them money for investment in agriculture, industry, and in infrastructure. So that is one way. Tariff reduction, rich country reduce the tariff for poor countries so that they can export their goods into their countries. Debt cancellation is another way of dealing with poverty. Since 2005, many debts to the World Bank and IMF have been cancelled. Yeah, so the world's poorest 128 countries still owe 23.6 trillion debt to IMF. Yeah. Now, debt cancellation, many analysts argue that the world's rich countries and banks should write off the debt owed to them by developing countries in recognition of historical injustice. They reason that the debt burden of the developing countries is so burdensome that it prevents them from focusing on building economic infrastructure, improving health and education of their population, and in developing economic policies that can help them emerge from poverty. The other issue, how do we respond to poverty, is to address climate change. International commitment to tackle climate change is urgently needed. Yeah, so how do we do that? Developed countries need to reduce their carbon emissions. So I hope, as international relations students, that I'm sure that you are aware of the different measures across the globe that looks into these things, the different perjanjian yang telah ditandatangani untuk deal with climate change. So these are some of the measures. The other important measure is tackle corruption. International companies should be open about how they work overseas. So these are some of the measure of to tackle development. Now, the other interesting thing nowadays is strong argument that democracy lowers inequality and promotes economic growth. Yeah, so the idea is democracies make it more difficult for elite group to misuse their power and enhance their wealth and income at the expense of the less well-to-do. So because of that, they increase political stability, so to provide a better investment climate. So that's why there's such a strong argument for these guys. There's such a strong argument saying that democratic system is more appropriate. It leads to better things. So they tend to enact policies that are more responsive to people's needs and benefit a wide range of people from all social classes. All right, thank you. That's basically part 3, or the final part of this issue of poverty, which is the third issue from this class. All right, thank you.